It's not the worst vampire movie ever made, guys, don't get me wrong, but man, it is most definitely the worst book to vampire movie adaptation ever. It gets it so wrong, in so many ways, on so many levels, and so many insults to the original content, with so many objections from author and creator of the Vampire Chronicles Anne Rice, that she washed her hands entirely of the project and her relationship with Warner Brothers.
Well, I didn't care for the movie of The Queen of the Damned at all. I begged the studio not to make that movie. I told them that the readers really didn't want that movie.
Rice was so angry at what was done to her story and her characters that we wouldn't see any further adaptations of her story until over 2 decades later with AMC's Interview with the Vampire. Anyway, Queen of the Damned, the book, awesome. Queen of the Damned, the movie, absolutely awful. And in today's video, I'm going to tell you why. So let's talk about how this movie got off the ground, and we will go from there. In the year 1994, Anne's first book, Interview with the Vampire, was made into a movie, put up on the big screen, and was a massive success with big names such as Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Christian Slater, and an up-and-coming Kirsten Dunst playing the role of Claudia. As I said, the movie was a hit, and it wasn't long before director Neil Jordan began pushing for a sequel, which unfortunately did not come. The hierarchy at Warner rejected sequel suggestions time and time again, with Anne herself even stepping in to try and get the movie made, even offering to write the screenplay free of charge. Her choice was to make the on-screen adaptation of The Vampire Lestat, as it was the natural successor to Interview. The studio once again said no. What's worse for Anne was that she had other studios offering to make the movie she wanted if she could secure the release, but it just wasn't happening for the author. However, a clause in the contract stated that if a sequel wasn't at least in somewhat of a production state by the year 2000, then she was free to pursue other deals and negotiations. Brilliant news for Anne. The sequel, the fans, we might have to wait, but we'll get the movie we want eventually. Do you think that's what Warner Brothers let happen? Of course not. They took $35 to $40 million and slapped together the Queen of the Damned movie, based on the novel of the same name, but with about a quarter of the Vampire Lestat novel smudged somewhere in between, and then tried to pass it off as the next installment of the Vampire Chronicles movie series. The budget was so low that the movie actually turned a profit, despite being absolutely panned by critics. Comparing that, for example, to Death to Smoochie's $50 million budget for an $8 million return for a movie about Smoochie the Rhino. Well, it just goes to show what the studio actually thought of Anne and her vision for the movie she was fighting so hard to get made correctly. If you're an Anne Rice fan, you might be feeling a little angry after hearing that, and I don't really blame you. Michael Reimer took on the role of director instead of Neil Jordan, and that trend followed with none of the actors from the original movie reprising their roles. Stuart Townsend took on the role of Lestat, and despite putting his own stamp on the role, he was completely different to the character of the vampire we see Cruise portrayed 8 years earlier. Lestat is described as having blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, while Townsend played him with brown hair and brown eyes. That was something I could live with until I seen Marius. This is how he's supposed to look, and this is how he looked in the movie. Not to mention that the movie was supposed to be set in the 80s, where glam rock ruled the scene. It was all about hair metal. Bands like Motley Crue, Poison, Bon Jovi, big hair, hairbands, skinny jeans, and leopard print boots. It was about where music was all about partying, living life to the full, and just rocking out. Instead, the setting was clearly changed to take place in the 2000s, with everyone looking like they're about to walk onto the set of a Linkin Park video before hopping a cab down the street to the free Papa Roach concert taking place. The movie itself had its own plot altogether and was taken in its own direction. It's supposed to be based on 2 books, yet takes absolutely nothing from them to steer the story in a somewhat respectable direction. It basically just takes the part concerning the stat from both books and tries to merge them together in what I can only call a complete insult to the original story, and it also leaves so many main characters out. Let's look at who they leave out, okay? They leave out Gabrielle, Lestat's mother, Nikki, Lestat's friend, who I might add is the first real example of a vampire struggling with their mental health due to the thought of living forever without a meaningful existence. It's such a sad part of the book and would have been great to see. They also leave out Lestat's father and his creator Magnus. Once again, another great tale of Lestat's birth as a vampire. Oh, don't worry, we do get the backstory, sorry guys, yeah. Instead of sticking to the original story, the writers instead decide to change Anne's work and make Marius be Lestat's maker. Because that makes sense. I mean, what is the point in writing and shooting a flashback scene for it only to be something that has never even happened? Daniel Malloy is nowhere to be seen. In case you don't know who Daniel is, he's the guy that interviewed Louis in the first book. Baby Jinx, well, if you've only seen the movie, I might as well say Bobby Junks, Bubby Jinx or Bibby Junks, because they're all as nonsensical as the others without knowledge of the novel's true events. Mikare, now this really bugged me. Mikare is so important to this story. She's the one that returns and kills Akasha, absolutely nowhere to be seen. It's as if she never existed. They just substitute her for her sister Maharet instead. Mikare is the one to deal the final blow because of the total and complete horrendous torture she suffered under Akasha's orders, having her raped, having her tongue removed, and then placed into a coffin and left to float in the sea. In comparison, Maharet gets quite similar treatment, but instead of her tongue, she gets her eyes removed, something she has to replace with human eyes, which only last temporarily. Trust me guys, it gets worse because there is no sign, not even a whisper, not even a mention of Louis de Pontefract, someone who meant a huge deal to Lestat and someone who was integral in the original book interview. Nope, they just decided to shelve him too, which is a massive shame, especially due to what I believe is an extremely important scene in the book where he tries to convince Lestat not to go ahead with the concert and asks him to be how they used to be, basically to become lovers once more. Yeah, for all the homoerotic tensions throughout the books between Louis and Lestat, not even a gaydar machine could detect anything in this movie, probably because it was straight washed with every anti-gay detergent in existence, with a character as important as Louis missing. This is supposed to be the conflict Lestat should feel before going ahead with his plans. Instead, they force a relationship between Lestat and Jessie, a girl he's met no more than twice, but of course, the premise of this movie is to put the boy with the girl, when the boy has loved another boy for the best part of 2 centuries. To be honest, the saving grace of this movie is Akasha herself, and that is all credit to what would have been a rather inexperienced Aaliyah at the time. What a mesmerizing performance she delivered for the entirety of the movie. The world was just denied an incredible musical act and what I'm sure would have been a future award-winning actress. She dedicated so much of herself to the role. She took 6 months of vocal linguistic lessons in order to nail down the Queen's accent.
The dark side. And it's fun to go to the movies and escape and really get deep into the whole fantastical characters. And I myself have always loved the dark side as well. So I think it's something that everyone secretly longs for and wants.
She practiced and practiced what she believed it would have been to be Akasha with the sacred core inside her, her blood rushing like waves through her veins as she almost swayed when she entered the room. How she commanded the attention of everyone during every scene she was in. Her intimidating presence literally makes you believe that something is going to happen with anyone she encounters. She should be the only positive thing remembered about this movie because without Aaliyah, this movie isn't worth even searching for on Google, guys. Then we have Pandora, Armand, Maul and Cayman appear in the movie. Brilliant, it's good news. They shoot the scenes and have dialogue, excellent. Then the scenes which were crucial to actually link the movie's plot together are completely cut from the film and tossed onto the editing floor. Just incredible, guys, and don't worry, it doesn't stop there, my friends. At least Armand is a little more book accurate, even if he does look like Leonardo DiCaprio's long lost brother. Don't even get me started on the special effects because they fall into the category of trying to be ahead of its time but turning out worse than intended. It's like trying to place a PS5 game into a Sega and hoping for a result. I can understand that it is to highlight the speed of the vampires being looked upon by the human eye, but it just doesn't work. It's cheap. It's just awful. Here's the thing, guys. When you try to merge 2 books together, there's a small thing to remember. It's 2 books worth of content, 2 stories, it's a shitload of information that has to somehow be made work. Lestat's entire upbringing was left out. His first encounter with Armand, where he beats him to a pulp in front of his satanic vampires, of whom would go on to become the Théâtre des Vampires, that was left out. It was Lestat who convinced these vampires to abandon their ways, just for your information. We only see Lestat waking up in the movie, but it completely ignores the reason why he was sleeping in the first place. He wasn't in a tomb or a fancy crypt either, like we see at the beginning of the movie. Lestat just buried himself deep within the earth, within the muck, within the soil, because he couldn't bear to continue existing any longer in such a boring, dull climate. It was only through hearing Satan's Night Out did he have the urge to want to crawl out of his grave. Jessie is such a massive character in the book, while she has no dimension whatsoever in the movie, and she's literally a supporting actor to a supporting actor in the film. In the book, Jessie discovers her powers as a young girl and even ends up talking to the ghost of Claudia at one point, which is a pretty big deal. It's all left out of the movie. Despite all of that, despite leaving 80% of the book out, the biggest issue I have is the absence of probably the most important piece of information in the entire franchise: the origin story of vampires, how they were created, how they came to be. And trust me guys, it goes into a lot of detail with a spirit known as Amel at the head of this info point, but alas, it's not even mentioned. Even the relationship Lestat has with the vampires he meets is just non-existent. There's no substance to any of it. The only somewhat okayish development was his connection with Marius, which, as I mentioned, was fueled on the fabricated beginning between the two. It was okay, of course, until it wasn't. Marius' character arc was completely and entirely wrong, that they should have just called him Greg, since everything but his name was changed. The vampire had over 2,000 years of knowledge and experience. He allowed himself to be guided by his wisdom. He'd seen and done it all as a vampire 10 times over. In the movie, however, he tried to be the Lestat to Lestat, like the Lestat to Louis in the movie's predecessor. It almost seems like they tried to make this movie so much better than Interview, but failed massively while doing it, with a budget that didn't even reflect what was needed to actually make it an appealing movie. Now look, I've said this at the beginning of the video, it wasn't all bad. They did get some things right. They showed Lestat waking to the sound of rock music. They showed his concert, him revealing himself to the world as a vampire. We see him challenge any opposing vampires to come forward if they had a problem with the road he was taking. We see the Sonoma compound, and all the vampires gather to discuss what to do with Akasha. We also see the Great Mother's death, and I just have to stop for a moment because despite seeing her death, surprise surprise, they changed it. Akasha was literally sizzling vampires one by one. This was not what happened in the book. Some of the vampires were as old as Akasha, Cayman and Maharet to name 2. There was no way Akasha could kill them so easily, and the fight scene wasn't that great, but you know something, they did show it. Mikare unfortunately didn't appear, but really what else is new about this movie's production? They had some fantastic and beautiful locations, but they really didn't make the most of them, except that beach scene between Lestat and Akasha. Great location, great setting, dozens of dead bodies in the background, small problem. It's daylight. Lestat cannot walk in the day. He was supposed to receive Akasha's telekinesis powers, not the ability to do what no vampire has ever been able to do: walk in the sun. Then the movie shits on itself by contradicting the entire subplot of Lestat's concert and calling all the vampires out. So let's just analyze this for a moment so I can get this straight, okay? So let's just slow down. I want you all to hear me out. The vampires are furious with Lestat for revealing himself. They've remained hidden from the beginning, and Lestat is just revealing all their secrets and everything about their species. The vampires in the book go to the concert but attack Lestat afterwards when he's leaving, when he's trying to get away. In the movie, they contradict their entire argument with him completely by attacking him on stage, flying everywhere, running at the speed of light, jumping so high it's nearly the height of a building, right before 100,000 plus people attending the concert, therefore revealing themselves, which is something that they didn't want to do. It's just ludicrous. Here is my conclusion, guys. If you haven't read the books and had no real idea of the characters and what they represent in the story, then it's a bearable movie. I mean, I can sit through it and it won't make my eyes bleed. It's watchable. However, it is hands down one of the worst book to movie adaptations ever made, and was basically only created as a slide, as an FU, as a middle finger to Anne Rice, instead of actually handing her the rights to her story back. As I said, it's watchable. If you haven't read the 2 books, then it tries to dissect and stitch them together in the most inappropriate, twisted and nonsensical way. I know the movie has its fans, but I can't ever see it holding up to Anne's name and work like its 1994 predecessor. Thankfully, we've already gotten season 1 of Interview with the Vampire, the TV series from AMC, and it's been fantastic in my opinion. Anyway guys, let me know your own thoughts on the movie in the comment section below. As I said, I know there are some of you that love this movie, and you know what, that's okay. Anyway guys, I put a lot of work into this, so please click that like button if you enjoyed, and hit that subscribe button if you want to join the Vampire Folklore family. Thanks again, I'll see you soon.